I'm Laura Westhoff. I'm Associate Professor of History and Education at the University of Missouri in St. Louis. I teach courses in the Progressive Era, women's history, social movements, and history education. So I was completing my PhD in history and teaching a course in the history of education at the university where I was, and I had taught in K-12 education before going to graduate school. So I came to my interest in history and history education really through teaching initially, and through the collaboration that I had with the Department of Education on my campus at Washington University. Met people who really introduced me to a whole field of study, which we now call scholarship of teaching and learning, about sort of disciplinary specific cognitive practices in history. And it was fascinating to me as a historian to begin to think about what I was doing in my research, in my day-to-day work as a researcher and as a teacher. My own research was on the social construction of knowledge. So my interest as a researcher and my interest in teaching and curriculum and how people think about issues, think about history, think about their action in the world, really dovetailed. For me, there wasn't a separation between research and teaching. It was all something that I found fascinating and important to understand, something that I was thinking about as a scholar and how to research and write about that, but also things that impacted my teaching, and as I thought about how I can help students understand the discipline and understand their learning in history. The two really intersected in a very seamless way for me. In my first book, in my dissertation, I was looking at how reform communities understood social reality and social change that was happening around them, and how they constructed explanations, causal relationships of what we would call social problems, and how they acted on those. And that as a progressive era historian, this was something that was increasingly ensconced in the professions in the United States, in disciplinary fields, in universities, or in social work, or public policy and politics. So the legitimation of social knowledge was seen very much as increasingly the province of experts. And in looking at grassroots activist communities and the kinds of explanations and mobilization of ideas and action around social problems our communities were dealing with was not only a process of a professionalization, but was a more democratic and fraught and contested process. Really, for me, it was about trying to get at people's cognitive worlds. So the research that I was doing put me in a frame of thinking about how people were making sense and learning and then turning around and acting. And that's very much what I saw students doing, that they're wrestling with a problem and developing explanations or understandings that hopefully then turn into actions as they move out of the classroom, or frames for their actions outside of the classroom. So the research questions then became a way of framing how I understood teaching. And probably that worked both ways, that my early experience with teaching framed my interest in research as well. My students at UMSL range from first-year freshmen to doctoral students in education. So our campus is a non-traditional serving campus. We have a lot of first-generation students. a lot of students who come not as prepared as my colleagues and I were to go to college, and a lot of really tremendously bright students who, for whom college access is something that they never imagined. So we on the undergraduate side see a lot of those students and the challenges that they bring as students and the excitement they bring as students, because for many of them, they're the first people in their families to go to college. So the excitement about being in a college classroom is really contagious. We have a lot of non-traditional students as well, so single parents returning to college or starting college for the first time, career transitions, people, retirees who never went to college and are coming back. So we really have a gamut in our undergraduate population. And our graduate students tend to be professionals practicing in a field and are looking for advanced degrees to enhance what they're doing in their jobs. The relationship between the scholarship of teaching and learning and the kind of historical research that I do is not just informed by teaching. I think it has, as I said before, there's a natural relationship in the particular field that I'm interested in. But as I've become more engrossed in SOTL questions, it's really exposed an approach to the discipline and inquiry into what doing good history looks like. And that often opens up angles of inquiry into my research. If I'm kind of struggling to make sense of a particular problem in the chapter that I'm writing, scholarship of teaching and learning has helped me think about what those problems might be in more explicit ways. So maybe thinking about what this chapter needs is more context, or I'm really not explaining cause and effect here very well, or I'm not. So it's made visible a language of the discipline that is reflexive back on my research that I think makes me a better scholar as a result. And I only came to the scholarship of teaching and learning through being reflective about my historical research, but it's become a cycle for me. My work in the scholarship of teaching and learning has come back to help my department in some very concrete ways. Several years ago, as we looked at our major and the courses we were offering, requiring of students in the major, we realized that we weren't doing a very good job of scaffolding historical skills across those required courses. So we developed at each level, we have, you might call 3 levels of introductory courses, and then more advanced courses, and finally the capstone courses required of the major. So we set out to articulate the development of those skills in a more coherent, sequential way, at least in a way where faculty could all understand that at this level students should be doing these kinds of things. So although we don't have a uniform course that looks the same for all faculty, the kinds of skills that faculty aim to teach in those courses are similar. Their paths are different, but the outcomes are expected across each of the sections. How the work of the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning and the AHA and the ISOTL organization might look in the future. I think there's a lot of really important directions we might think about going. One agenda item is to return to an exploration of the development of historical thinking and history education across the K-16 continuum. And really as Sodal education came out of a tradition of K-12 research initially, or was influenced by educational researchers. I think we have a lot to learn from each other, and to think developmentally about the kinds of skills and the kinds of knowledge and the kinds of awareness and historical consciousness that we're all aiming to develop across K-16. And I think that's an important thing for both AHA and for iSOTL to be thinking about. The tuning project lends itself to a lot of natural possibilities in terms of supporting the future development of faculty and departments who go through that process. So in terms of iSOTL, as researchers, I think there's many who have an agenda of more fully developing research around the questions that faculty have and the challenges they have in their classrooms, and kind of deepening and broadening our knowledge about history learning. Tuning can play a valuable role as both an audience and a participant for that. For iSOTL, I also see an important distinction between the dissemination of what we've learned, which I think is important, but also a commitment to maybe an epistemological shift in what ends up being our presentation. So in many formats, it's the expert coming to share the results of research. And I think that there's a more participatory possibility to think about teaching as collaborative, our questions of developing knowledge about history learning as collaborative. And the AHA can provide venues where people who are interested in those questions can come together and workshop issues and set agendas and work collaboratively towards those enriching that knowledge in ways that haven't been the norm at professional conferences. And that's very exciting to me, that participatory approach, which is really at the heart of scholarship of teaching and learning, but in professional presentation, that's not always clear. And the AHA can do quite a bit towards legitimizing the value of this kind of research within the academy and within departments. So, I'm looking forward to ways we might think about AHA and iSOTL, much as you're doing with digital initiatives or collaborative work as forms of knowledge production that are worthy or trying to understand the dimensions of what makes that good work. I think there's work to do here with scholarship of teaching and learning as well.